Hello there, Ben Bowers, the Spirit Specialist, and I am here today to talk to you about two new releases from the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. We have Filey Bay Sherry Cask Reserve number 3, and we also have a brand new finish that's sort of part of their core range. This is their port finish, batch number 1. Before I tell you what both of these taste like, and I'll do both in one video rather than doing two separate ones, I'm going to give you some background information about the distillery itself.
The Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery was founded in 2016 by Tom Mellor and David Thompson. Tom was an arable farmer who set up the Wold Top Brewery in 2013 and already had ideas about opening a whisky distillery in conjunction, and so partnered with long-standing friend and marketing expert David to set up the new Spirit venture. The barley used for both beer and whisky production is grown on Tom's own fields, with milling, mashing and fermentation taking place at the brewery 4.5 miles away from the distillery itself. If the distillery was in Scotland, this would not be allowed due to Scotch Whisky Association regulations. In planning the distillery, Tom and David enlisted the help of legendary distillery consultant Jim Swan, who was well known around the world for assisting new distilleries such as Cavallan, Kilchoman, Penderyn and Lindores Abbey before his untimely death in 2017. The house style will ultimately be akin to the likes of Glenlivet, fruit-forward but somewhat delicate in body. The master distiller is a young man named Joe Clark. Joe's first job in the whisky industry was as a part-timer in the York branch of the Whisky Shop, at that time managed by none other than yours truly. His passion and enthusiasm was obvious from the very start, and he has worked tirelessly to ensure the early spirit releases from the distillery, under the brand name of Filey Bay, are of the highest quality. However, as is a legal requirement whenever I discuss Joe, I am obliged to show you this picture of Joe with our good friend Ollie Chilton of the Whisky Exchange during a trip to Islay. Feel free to ask him about the long hair, it's quite the story. In addition to 2 copper pot stills, a directional arm can connect to a 4-plate column still, which enables them to play around with reflux and redistillation. Maturation takes place principally in first fill ex-bourbon casks from Old Forester, although plenty of experimentation has been done with other cask types and finishing. Indeed, the current core range features a finish using Muscatel wine casks and an STR ex-Rioja cask finish. STR, or shaved, toasted and recharred, is a signature of Jim Swan's legacy. Filey Bay flagship, however, can be seen as the key introduction to the Filey Bay flavour profile, with light, fruity and creamy notes throughout. Unlike other recent new whisky distilleries across the UK, Spirit of Yorkshire never had any intention to delve into the massive gin or growing rum market, which would have given them an early and potentially lucrative revenue stream. The only concession they've made was the release of a whisky and malt spirit cream liqueur at the end of 2020, allowing visitors to their distillery who didn't drink whisky the chance to still appreciate their output. The third release from Filey Bay's Sherry Cask Reserve series changes things up from the previous Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez bottlings, this time utilising barrels that have previously held Fino Sherry, traditionally known for being a drier and spicier flavour profile of wine. However, heavier spirit from the pot still was drawn into 3 casks, whereas lighter, fruitier distillate run through the column still spent time in a completely separate pair, before all 5 were married together to produce a run of only 2,000 bottles at an ABV of 46%. The first batch of port finish was originally earmarked to be released in late 2021, but was held back to ensure the influence of the barrels used were maximised to the full potential. Originally filled into ex-bourbon barrels in mid-2017, the whisky was transferred into 10 casks that had previously held port wines in late 2020, to be finished for what would end up to be a total of 2 years. Only 3,300 bottles of batch 1 are available, with an ABV of 46%.
Okay, so what do we do first? Because we've got the arguably sweeter port finish, but then we've got that slightly drier side potentially from the Fino. I have some samples given by Morgan, the sales manager. Thank you very much, which allows me A, to do videos, and B, to share with some customers who may be interested. Let's go with the Sherry Cask Reserve first, because they're both bottled at 46% as well. So we have 5 Fino sherry barrels that have been used, 3 of which have used the heavier distillate from the pot still, and then 2 of which have been using lighter distillate from the column still that they have there as well, because it allows them to do this kind of playing around with column still and pot still. Now, obviously, with Scotch whisky regulations, you wouldn't be able to call it single malt whisky by using a column still, but this is English single malt whisky, and there is not yet official regulations, but there is now starting to be a coming together of these new distilleries that are in England to kind of agree some kind of working method that everybody can adhere to in order to kind of maintain consistency and quality. Now, if the English whiskey industry were to go, well, we're just going to do exactly the same as Scotland, Filey Bay Spirit of Yorkshire would actually have a bit of an issue, because the milling, mashing, fermentation is done at the Wold Brewery, which is up the road. Now, part of Scotch regulations is milling, mashing, fermentation has to be done in the distillery. It has to be done on site. And obviously has to be pot still in order to be called Scotch single malt. Whereas Filey Bay are doing single malt whiskey, but they're also using column still as well. So hopefully, without causing too much issue with these guys, and to be fair, you know, they Spirit of Yorkshire was one of the earliest English whiskey distilleries, and arguably is one of the more highly regarded ones in the whiskey industry. So I think they arguably have more of a grounding to be able to say, no, we don't want to just, you know, it's going to cause them some problems if everybody else goes, no, we're just going to follow Scotch. But, you know, it does mean that when we have some kind of regulation come in for the English whiskey industry, it is going to be slightly different to Scotch, I think, but it will allow them a little bit more flexibility. Anyway, outside of that, so we've got this pot still, we've got column still, we've got two different types of distillate going into this Fino sherry. Now, Fino sherry traditionally more on the drier side. You know, Fino sherry I always associate with like bone dry, really good with salted almonds, that sort of thing. You don't get many Fino sherry whiskies, be they finishes or full maturation, because that dryness can sometimes be a little bit overpowering. It can be a little bit too dry. So let's see how it goes with what would be sort of the normally a lighter kind of like that citrusy feel that we get with the bourbon casks, the flagship and everything like that, and what will be the base for the port finish. Let's see whether we get a bit closer, because what I found with the previous sherry cask reserves, so we had the Oloroso and we had the Pedro Jimenez, was they were much more that kind of like rich, fruity sherry character, and it really did highlight that you could make a different type of Filey Bay whiskey that still works really, really well. Is the Fino going to be closer to the flagship style? Is it going to be lighter? I'm expecting this to be a little bit more nutty as well. So bottle at 46%, so we're not looking at cask strength or anything like that. And on the nose, straight away, there's a fruit note, but it's light, slightly floral. I'm getting almost like a lemon barley sugar in there as well. There's a citrusy note on it, but it's not as creamy as the bourbon maturation for the flagship. It's definitely lighter. There's a little bit of soft spice in there, but I wouldn't call this sweet necessarily. Do you know what it reminds me of slightly? Because there is a little bit of a nuttiness to it as well. Sugared almonds, which I absolutely adore. You get that sweet sugar, not quite icing sugar, but you get like a sweet sugary note as well as a dry nuttiness in there. You get a really nice kind of light fruit. There's hints of strawberries and raspberries in there, a little touch of summer pudding, but again, it's not sweet. It's not a sherry bomb. It's not fruit cake. It's not anything like that. This is much lighter, fresher. There's a really, really interesting nose on here. There's a lot going on in here, but it's quite delicate, but still moving and transforming all the way through. Okay, let's see what we like on the palate. Oh, that really carries through as well. There's a lovely sweet note to this, but this is very much kind of like icing sugar sweetness. There is fruitiness in there, but again, it's light red berries. This is not dark sherry fruit cake feel, you know, like a proper dark whiskey, you know, like an Oloroso or a PX, where it's really kind of dark, dense fruit cake. This is much more kind of like lighter fruits. Not necessarily orchard fruits either. There is a bit of a tart tatin feel, but I'm getting summer fruits as well as sort of baked apple, poached pear, but that lighter side, you know, there's not this kind of like charred caramel. It is actually like a light butterscotchy caramel running through. There's a little bit of a nuttiness in there, but again, it's more almonds than it is, say, pecans and walnuts or anything like that. it's really, really interesting. I really like this, and it's quite a different expression. It's different enough from the sort of the house style of the flagship, but it's not as kind of dark as the previous sherry cask reserves. It stands on its own. I do like that flavor profile though. Now, the shop is cold. It is, what date are we on now? 24th of November. And this week in particular, it has really turned quite cold. So it feels like this is slightly chilled, because I feel slightly chilled, and not in a laid back way, it's actually quite cold. So I do wonder what this will be like, sort of a room temperature that is going to be warmer. But this feels light, refreshing, almost spring-like. It's almost like this should have come out with the flavor profile that it's got. It feels like it should have been released in like March, April, sometime like that. There's a really good balance on it, and actually the finish very much lingers. I can still taste that, like I say, very slightly floral, slightly sweet, slightly nutty, sugared almonds, touch of kind of like candied orange. But again, I'm saying all these kind of like fruits and flavor profiles that make it sound like it's very, very sweet. It's not. It's actually brilliantly balanced and surprisingly light. There is a touch of freshness to it, but it's not minty. It's like I say, it's like this barley sugar feel. It's really, really lightly sweet, but in such a pleasant way. I am really impressed with that. Really impressed. I think 46 is about bang on. It would be interesting to see what it would be like at, say, 48.50, but I think that lighter touch that's on the flavor profile actually means that the higher alcohol content maybe will dominate the flavor profile a little bit too much. Right, so let's move on to the port finish. So, as I probably would have said in the blurb, because I've not actually recorded it yet, but we've got 2,000 bottles of the Sherry Cask Reserve, and that is it. The port finish is so this is a batch 1, so that implies that there will be potentially a 2 and a 3, but we have 3,300 bottles of this because this is a kind of like a smaller run than they would normally do. Now, I love port finishes, and actually, this was supposed to come out last year. This was due out in November of 2021, but I understand that essentially at the point when they were intending to release it, it still wasn't quite there. It wasn't as they wanted it. It wasn't quite dark enough, and the flavor profile, it wasn't picking up enough in the time that they wanted, so they just left it. They left it in cask, and they kept checking it, and now it is coming out a year later. Hopefully, much for the better. Now, I love port casks. I love port. I love anything in a port cask. It's an absolute sucker. Pedro Jimenez, port cask, whiskey, yes please. Either of those two, I'm happy as Larry. So I'm very, very much looking forward to this. Again, bottled at 46%. And I'm glad I put this on second because this has more weight on the nose. But there's more of a wininess to it. It's not necessarily, it's obvious it's port, but there is definitely a wine element in there. You get a little bit of, already on the nose, this kind of like slightly tannin element coming through. Darker red berries now. I'm getting black cherry. I'm getting a little bit of peppery spice on there as well. To be honest, I would have, just on the nose, I would have gone, maybe not necessarily port finish. I would have said, oh, is this some kind of red wine cask? But obviously they've got the STR already. What I'm hoping for here is, the STR has that kind of red berry note, but I'm hoping for the port to be deeper, richer, rounder, maybe a slightly sweeter as well. On the nose, you get more of a tannin note, which implies to me more red wine than port, but port does have that tannin element as well. You know, port is fortified red wine in essence. I do like that though. I do like that kind of slightly spicy, dark red berry, cherry, slightly pruny, that sort of feel, but spicier than that as well. This already on the nose is like, oh, this is a good winter whiskey. Oh, now the port comes through. Oh, yes. Oh, straight away. Loving that. Absolutely loving that. There's a brilliant texture on it. And that's the creaminess from that bourbon cask maturation. It's the creaminess that you get from the flagship as the sort of the base for this to then go into their different types of finishes. So you get a creaminess, but whereas with the flagship and things like the Muscatel, it's like a citrus cream. This is almost like an Eton mess cream, where you have cream lightly whipped, a touch of meringue in there, but rather than strawberries and raspberries as you get in an Eton mess, this is more kind of like cherries and plums, more of a wintry Eton mess. There's a lovely warmth to this. The texture is amazing, but there's this enveloping warm red berry, dark red berry feel coming all the way through. That touch of spices there, the little kind of dry tannin element that's on the nose, not so much on the palate, fortunately, because I think it would probably be a little bit overpowering. Oh, I love that mouthfeel. It really coats the inside of the mouth. Again, it's chilly in the shop, so I'd be interested to see what this is like at a sort of a warmer room temperature. I wonder whether actually that red berry note will be even richer and more intense. But I'm liking this like slightly chilled atmosphere that we've got. I still love the flavor profile even here. I'm not saying stick it in the fridge and pour it from the fridge. And I'm not going to sit here and try and warm it up or wait for the shop to warm up, because we will be here all day. But again, finish going on really, really, really long. Like I can still taste it now. I love the berry element, but it feels deeper. It feels warmer than the STR. The STR berry notes that are in there from those wine casks, because it's Rioja wine casks, are more, again, strawberries, raspberries, red currants, that sort of feel. This is much more kind of that darker fruit, that prune, cherry, that sort of thing. But again, we don't get that fruit cake feel. We get that berry wine feel, but without the tannins, because port has less tannins in. You get more of a beefiness to it because of the fortification. It's beautiful. It's everything I hoped it would be. It's clear its port's been involved. You can kind of taste that thread of port, red wine, fortification, tannin, as well as that creamy Filey-based style that they come through. That, for me, is a brilliant Christmas Day whiskey. That is probably going to be, because I normally pick something to go as a dram after Christmas dinner. You know, as the kids are kind of playing with their toys, and the day is sort of done, but it's 7 o'clock. It's not quite bedtime yet. You're kind of full, you're tired, but Christmas is winding down. You've had your months beforehand of getting wound up for it and doing all the presents, everything like that. You've had your Christmas lunch, you're nice and full, you've still got the evening to look forward to, and that's the time when I like to sit with a really good dram and just chill for about half an hour. And that is very close to the top of the list, if not already there, because you want a really good whiskey with complexity that's not heavily peated, that's going to fight you or anything like that, but you want that warm feel. You want that warm, fruity, warm spices, that kind of Christmas in a glass, and that is absolutely it. So, yet again, Joe has absolutely knocked it out of the park twice. So, yeah, brilliant. Sherry Cask Reserve, really, really impressive. Limited edition, 1 of 2,000 bottles, highly recommended. If you're looking for essentially an example of a sherry whiskey that is doing something slightly different. You know, like I say, it's slightly sweet, it's slightly floral. It's not a sherry bomb. It's not fruit cake. It's sugared almonds. It's delicate. It's drier. It's got nuts. It's got that sort of feel to it. Whereas if you want Christmas in a glass, the port finish is absolutely the one to go for. Both of them are available through the website, www.spiritspecialist.com. If you are coming in store, you can see I have these, so you are more than welcome to try them. I don't have much stock. I don't know what the stock levels are going to be like for the Sherry Cask Reserve in terms of I had an allocation for it, and I don't know how much is left once it's been allocated to the distillery and also to the other retailers around the country. So grab it while you can. Highly recommended. And again, the port finish is not like there is a limited number of this and less than the other finishes, which have all quite quickly sold out. So that's me done. I shall see you in the next video. Cheers.